different ideas here. Okay, so let me just build these real quick, and then we'll kind of jump into it.
This will be a...
Wanna turn up the heat?
You're going down, big boy.
What are you... This will be my...
Fine, so that's more expensive than this.
Going down, big boy.
So high worker, this is a 5-worker open. This is a 3-worker open. This is a 2-worker open. Yep, hold on. It's off. No, I know. That works. Thanks. Not AF. All right. The missus got punch pizza today, and they messed up one of her orders. I messed up her order, so they gave her 2 pizzas, and so I have a half a pizza from there, from the missus. So that smells delicious, and we'll eat that here momentarily. But let's jump into when to snail, when not to snail. All right, so let me just formulate a couple ideas in my head. Okay. I think I've got an idea here. All right, so jumping into this one, everyone asks me all the time, why do I snail on 1, or why don't I snail on 1? What should I do on 1? Isn't king up better? Isn't king up worse? And I think the hardest part for me is it, like everything in Legion, it depends. It always depends, because your open should dictate what you do. Your elo should dictate what you do. And I think that's really kind of where you should start. I think to start off with it, if your elo is sub 1k, it's sub 2k, excuse me, not 1k, well, 1k2, sub 2k, you probably don't want to snail. Most often, players are not going to be playing risky enough starts to leak to a snail in those, general elo brackets. At least currently, from everything I've seen in my coaching, everything I've seen when I've played games, oftentimes sub 2k, you're never going to leak them with a snail. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. But there are certain opportunities that are given to you by sending a snail. And I think the biggest thing is that it keeps players honest, right? As you get higher up in the elo brackets, people are more and more likely to build higher worker opens and try to really push that envelope for their worker counts in the first handful of waves. So it gives them some pressure, right? Keeps them honest to not always go for those crazy opens. But on the topic of like, when is it a good idea? Traditionally, it's when you have a good hold, a long hold, or somewhere in between on 1 that you think you can gain some advantage off of the snail. So for instance, with Bone Crusher. Bone Crusher is a 5-worker open in almost every way, shape, and form with the majority of low-cost options in your role. You can make it work with Zuka to hold the snail on 2. You can make it work with a lot of different things to hold. And then this Bone Crusher being a high worker, you have longer waves, etc. Snail can be sometimes seen as a positive. In situations where you're going to be 2-worker opens, and in this spot, Pyro is a 2-worker open, and 4-worker by the end of wave 1, you're probably not going to want to send a snail. You're just going to, generally speaking, have less time wanted with a lower open when it comes to workers, lower worker open. The biggest thing is like if your opponent has, say, a 5-worker open and you're sitting here with Pyro, you send them a snail. They hold, they're a 5-worker hold, and they're able to sit there and just gain Mythium that entire time while you're gaining a lower rate of Mythium. It's generally seen as a bad thing for yourself. And then there's some kind of like in-between ones, right? Berserker is a 3-worker open that, is 5-worker by the end of wave 1 if you're cash out pretty easily, 5-worker. And so, there might be a situation in which sending a snail against a person who's more likely than not to leak on one is potentially a positive. But King Up does still work. And I think one thing that people often forget is if you press tab, so you press tab here, you bring up the screen, and you click on yourself or an opponent, you can view their profile. And so you can see what the opening tendencies are of a person very, very quickly, just by opening their profile really quick, seeing what they have, and then you can go on your merry way. There's also prior match history, right? And so you can look in here and be, okay, the person's 270 start, a 130 or 145, excuse me, or 175, excuse me, with Zeus. You've got a lot of high cost openers. So probably doesn't make sense to Snail. Probably does not make sense to Snail in that situation, right? So then King Up is in order. There's also the thought process, right? And I think this is probably more prevalent in lower elo than anything, where how you send and what you send matters a little bit more in certain games. And so let's say you are this Bone Crusher. It might make sense for you to skip on one. Don't send one and then maybe go for a Dragon Turtle on 2. Because Dragon Turtle 2 is very much a possible option, an opportunity for you. If you do so choose to go for it with a higher worker open. But I think at the end of the day, it's kind of preference. Some people opt, obviously, to long save much more than others. Some people opt to go for sends more frequently than others. There's in-betweens to that, right? And so I think King Upping on 1, especially as a low elo, probably is the preferred option to Snail. But as you get higher elo, you check profiles, you understand what's going on in your game state, what you have for workers, what the enemy might have for workers. You can more easily determine the worth and value of that Snail. I hope this was kind of informative. I know it was a little bit rambly, guys, but if you did find it helpful, like, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace. Yeah, that was just a quick YouTube segment. I was a little bit more rambly than I would have liked, but I think the information there was still good. How do you determine how many workers to buy depending on your first unit? It's time, knowledge, right? Like, certain units can hold on 4 workers, certain units can hold on 3, certain units can hold on 6, depending on what they've sent you, etc. Generally speaking, most opens that are tier 4 or tier 5 should be at least a guaranteed 4 worker open, if not 5 worker, especially if they send you a Snail on 1. The Snail on 1 is the Snail on 1 or King Up on 1 is the important part there, Bokuzen. But I guess it kind of, again, depends a little bit, right? Like, depending on what they're opting to send you and what they're opting to do, your build and setup should change, right? If they've sent me King Up on 1 and 2, I'm more likely to go 6 worker Berserker. If they send me a Snail on 1 and I hold a Bone Crusher, and then the Snail on 2 with Bone Crusher and I hold, I'll probably be 6 worker. And they send on 3 and I hold, I might be 7 worker. Right? So you got to just know the lobby you're in, know what they've sent you, know your thresholds, and that's something that's not easy to understand. It takes time, it takes a lot of energy to understand those thresholds. But I think that's where sometimes checking out like my videos, seeing what I'm doing can be beneficial. But I would say stick to the 41 rule outside of the first 4 workers. For newer players, stick to 41. Yeah, I think that's kind of that. Yeah, I think that's kind of covers everything here. Maybe not as neat and tidy as I would have liked it, but I think that covers everything there. All right, let me eat quick, guys.